I've worked retail security for 12 years across different chains, but nothing prepared me for what I discovered at the Riverside Walmart on November 23, 2023. What started as routine pre-Black Friday security checks turned into the most disturbing breach of trust I've ever witnessed. My name is Marcus Henderson, and I was the overnight security supervisor at the Walmart Supercenter on Commerce Boulevard in Riverside, California. The night before Black Friday is always chaos: restocking, price changes, last-minute display setups. But this particular Wednesday night, something felt off from the moment I clocked in at 10 p.m. The first sign of trouble came around 11:30 p.m. when I noticed employee door C was propped open with a small wedge. This door led directly to our electronics stockroom where we kept the high-value Black Friday items: 75-inch TVs, gaming consoles, laptops. Protocol required all doors to remain locked and monitored during overnight shifts. I radioed our overnight manager, Sarah Chin, about the door. She seemed genuinely surprised and asked me to secure it immediately. But as I approached, I heard voices from inside the stockroom, hushed conversation that immediately stopped when my keychain jingled. When I entered, I found two people I didn't recognize wearing red Walmart vests, standing next to a shopping cart filled with electronics still in their boxes. The woman, mid-30s with blonde hair, froze like a deer in headlights. The man beside her, heavy-set with a beard, tried to act casual. "Evening, folks," I said, hand instinctively moving to my radio. "Can I see your employee badges?" That's when everything went sideways. The woman, who identified herself as Lisa, claimed she was from the Henderson store helping with overnight inventory. But her badge looked wrong. The photo was clearly altered, and the magnetic strip was damaged. When I asked for her employee number to verify, she started stuttering about forgetting it. The man, calling himself Mike, had an equally suspicious story about being transferred temporarily for Black Friday prep. But when I looked at their cart more closely, my blood ran cold. These weren't random electronics, they were the exact doorbuster items scheduled to go on sale at 6 a.m., still hours away. Mike had grabbed 3 of our $199 50-inch TVs that normally retail for $449. Lisa had loaded up on PlayStation 5 bundles, Nintendo Switches, and MacBook Airs, easily $3,000 worth of merchandise at the Black Friday prices that weren't supposed to be active until morning. I immediately called for backup and contacted Sarah Chin. While waiting, I tried to keep them calm, but Lisa was getting increasingly agitated. She kept insisting they had permission from corporate to pre-purchase items, claiming they were doing inventory reconciliation. When Sarah arrived, she took one look at the fake badges and called the police. That's when we discovered the real scope of this operation. During the investigation, we found that this wasn't just two random people trying to score early deals. They had inside information, detailed knowledge of our stockroom layout, specific item locations, and even our security rotation schedule. Someone had provided them with nearly identical employee vests and poorly counterfeited badges. The real breakthrough came when Officer Patricia Williams from the Riverside Police Department arrived in her 2020 Ford Explorer Police Interceptor. She ran their IDs and discovered both individuals had been arrested 3 months earlier at a Target in Bakersfield for a similar scheme. They were part of a larger operation targeting major retailers during high-volume sales events. But here's what made this case truly disturbing. They knew our employee door C's alarm had been temporarily disabled for maintenance, information that should have been known only to management and security. Someone inside our store was feeding them critical intelligence. During questioning, Lisa finally broke down and admitted they had a contact inside our store who provided floor plans, security schedules, and even the timing of manager breaks. This person had been selling information to organized retail theft rings for months, targeting multiple Walmart locations across Southern California. The investigation revealed that our insider contact was actually David Torres, a 3-year employee in our electronics department who had access to inventory systems and management communications. He'd been recruited by this theft ring after gambling debts left him financially desperate. Torres had provided detailed intelligence on high-value merchandise locations, security camera blind spots, and even specific information about which doors had maintenance issues. The ring would hit stores the night before major sales events when inventory was highest and security was focused on crowd control preparation rather than internal theft. What really shook me was discovering this had been happening for at least 6 months across 12 different Walmart locations. The theft ring had stolen over $200,000 in merchandise using inside information, targeting everything from electronics to pharmacy items to seasonal goods. The immediate aftermath was swift but unsettling. Both Lisa, real name Amanda Parker, and Michael Rodriguez, were arrested and charged with commercial burglary, possession of stolen property, and identity fraud. Torres was terminated immediately and faced additional charges for conspiracy and theft. But the real horror was realizing how long this had been going on under our noses. Store management conducted a full security audit and discovered evidence of previous breaches we'd attributed to paperwork errors or inventory shrinkage. Items missing from stockrooms, unexplained access card usage, security footage with convenient gaps. 3 days later, while processing the incident reports, I received a call from Detective Lisa Morgan at the Riverside County Sheriff's Office. She informed me that Amanda Parker had been cooperating with investigators and revealed the full scope of the operation. This wasn't just about Black Friday deals. The theft ring had been systematically targeting retailers across 3 counties, using corrupted employees to provide intelligence on everything from delivery schedules to management vacation time. They'd recruit financially vulnerable employees through social media, offering quick cash for harmless information that gradually escalated to full-scale theft operations. The psychological impact on our team was immediate. Employees who had worked together for years started questioning each other's motives. Management implemented new security protocols that made everyone feel like potential suspects. The trust that makes a workplace function had been completely shattered. For me personally, the incident changed how I approached security work. I'd always focused on external threats, shoplifters, break-ins, workplace violence. But discovering that our biggest security vulnerability was someone we trusted, someone who had access to employee break rooms and knew our personal schedules, was genuinely terrifying. The legal proceedings revealed even more disturbing details. Torres had been photographing internal memos with his phone, recording conversations with managers, and even accessing employee personal information to identify potential new recruits for the theft ring. His gambling addiction had made him desperate enough to compromise not just company security, but the personal safety of his coworkers. What happened to me that night made me realize how vulnerable retail workers really are. We trust our coworkers with sensitive information, access to restricted areas, and knowledge of our personal lives. When that trust is weaponized by organized criminal operations, it creates risks that go far beyond simple theft. The case eventually connected to a larger federal investigation into organized retail crime that spanned multiple states. But for those of us working overnight security at retail locations, it was a wake-up call about threats we never anticipated. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted at work was involved in something that made you question everything you thought you knew about them? What would you do if you found out a coworker had been secretly gathering information about your workplace for months? I'm Detective Jennifer Walsh with the Bakersfield Police Department, and what I'm about to share happened on December 8, 2023, at the Walmart Supercenter on Ming Avenue. In my 15 years investigating stalking cases, I'd never encountered anything quite like Robert Chen's systematic surveillance operation targeting retail employees. The case began when Walmart Loss Prevention Supervisor Angela Martinez called our department around 2:30 p.m. She'd discovered what appeared to be professionally installed surveillance equipment hidden throughout their electronics department, tiny cameras disguised as price tags, audio recording devices tucked behind product displays, and even a modified security mirror with a hidden lens. When I arrived in my unmarked 2019 Honda Accord, Angela led me through the electronics section where they'd found the devices. What I saw was genuinely disturbing: a sophisticated surveillance network that had been monitoring employee activities for weeks, possibly months. The cameras were strategically positioned to capture employee conversations, customer interactions, and even private moments when staff thought they were alone. One device was hidden inside a fake PlayStation controller display, another disguised as a USB charging station near the employee break area. The level of planning and investment was staggering. Store security footage helped us identify our suspect. Robert Chen, a 34-year-old software engineer from Delano, had been visiting the store regularly for 3 months, always carrying various electronic devices and spending unusual amounts of time in specific sections. He'd developed an elaborate system for installing and retrieving surveillance equipment during normal shopping hours. What made this case particularly unsettling was Chen's motivation. When we searched his apartment with a warrant, we found extensive documentation of Walmart employee activities, detailed schedules, personal information gathered from overheard conversations, photographs taken without consent, and even recordings of employees discussing their personal lives during breaks. Chen had convinced himself that Walmart employees were deliberately sabotaging products to force customers to buy extended warranties. His surveillance operation was designed to gather evidence of this supposed conspiracy. He documented everything from how employees handled merchandise to their conversations about product returns. The evidence we collected was overwhelming. Chen had installed 23 separate recording devices throughout the store over a 4-month period. He'd captured hundreds of hours of audio and video, including employees' private conversations about their families, financial struggles, and personal relationships. Several employees had complained about feeling watched, but management initially attributed this to normal workplace stress. Maria Santos, a 5-year electronics department veteran, told us she noticed the same customer appearing frequently and asking unusual questions about internal procedures. She'd reported feeling uncomfortable, but was told it was probably just an overly curious shopper. The psychological impact on the targeted employees was severe. When we revealed the extent of Chen's surveillance, several staff members broke down completely. They'd been unknowingly monitored during vulnerable moments, discussing personal problems, dealing with difficult customers, or simply trying to get through their shifts. Timothy Rodriguez, the electronics department manager, was particularly shaken. Chen had captured him dealing with a family emergency phone call, a private conversation with his supervisor about a performance review, and even recorded him eating lunch alone in the stockroom while going through a divorce. Chen's documentation revealed he'd been building detailed profiles of individual employees. He knew their work schedules, break times, personal relationships, and even their financial situations based on overheard conversations. He'd created spreadsheets tracking their behavior patterns and noting what he considered suspicious activities. The breakthrough in understanding Chen's mindset came from his computer files. He'd developed an elaborate conspiracy theory that Walmart employees were part of a coordinated effort to sell defective merchandise. He believed they were trained to damage products subtly, recommend unnecessary services, and deliberately provide poor customer service to maximize corporate profits. His surveillance had escalated from simple observation to active intelligence gathering. He'd recorded employees' conversations with customers, documented their product handling techniques, and even captured footage of normal warehouse operations that he interpreted as evidence of deliberate sabotage. When we arrested Chen at his apartment on December 12th, he seemed genuinely confused about why his actions were illegal. He insisted he was performing a public service by exposing what he believed was systematic fraud. He planned to publish his findings online and contact local news stations with his evidence. The legal proceedings revealed the full scope of Chen's operation. He'd spent over $3,000 on surveillance equipment and had been planning to expand his monitoring to other retail locations. He'd researched employee parking areas, studied store layouts, and even attempted to gather employees' personal information from social media. District Attorney Michelle Park charged Chen with multiple felonies including stalking, unlawful surveillance, and invasion of privacy. The employees he monitored were offered counseling services and legal support for potential civil actions. But the real horror for the Walmart staff was realizing how long they'd been unknowingly observed. Conversations they'd considered private, moments of vulnerability during difficult shifts, and even casual interactions with coworkers had all been recorded and analyzed by someone they'd never suspected. The investigation revealed that Chen had begun his surveillance after a poor experience with a laptop purchased 6 months earlier. What started as dissatisfaction with customer service had escalated into paranoid delusion that evolved into systematic stalking of retail employees who had nothing to do with his original complaint. Store management implemented additional security measures and provided trauma counseling for affected employees. Several staff members requested transfers to other locations, unable to feel safe in an environment where they'd been secretly monitored for months. The case highlighted how retail employees, who already face daily stress from difficult customers and demanding schedules, can become targets of elaborate harassment campaigns. These workers, earning modest wages while providing essential services, had been victimized by someone who viewed them as conspirators rather than human beings trying to do their jobs. Chen ultimately pled guilty to multiple charges and received 3 years probation with mandatory mental health treatment. His surveillance equipment was destroyed, and he was banned from all Walmart locations statewide. But for the employees he monitored, the psychological damage was lasting. The aftermath forced me to reconsider how we investigate stalking cases involving retail workers. These employees interact with hundreds of customers daily, making it difficult to identify when someone crosses the line from curious shopper to dangerous observer. What disturbed me most was how Chen's delusions had led him to dehumanize the very people he claimed to be protecting consumers from. He'd reduced hardworking individuals to subjects in his paranoid surveillance operation, completely disregarding their privacy, dignity, and right to feel safe at work. Have you ever felt like you were being watched at work, or noticed the same customer showing up repeatedly with unusual interest in employee activities? How would you react if you discovered someone had been secretly recording your workplace conversations for months? My name is Rachel Thompson, and I need to share what happened to me and other customers at the Westfield Walmart on Industrial Boulevard in Stockton, California, during January 2024. What I experienced there made me afraid to shop alone, and taught me that sometimes the people meant to protect us can become the very threat we need protection from. I'm a 28-year-old teacher, and I typically do my grocery shopping on Sunday afternoons after grading papers. The Westfield Walmart was convenient close to my apartment, well-stocked, and usually not too crowded. But starting in mid-January, my routine shopping trips became increasingly uncomfortable due to one particular security guard. The first incident happened on January 14th around 3 p.m. I was shopping for weekly groceries, nothing unusual, just produce, dairy, and household items. I noticed a security guard watching me from the moment I entered the store. He was a tall, thin man in his 40s with graying hair and an intense stare that made my skin crawl. Initially, I thought maybe I'd accidentally triggered some security alert, perhaps my purse looked suspicious, or I'd inadvertently walked through an exit-only entrance. But as I moved through different sections of the store, he continued following me at a distance, pretending to check displays or speak into his radio while keeping his eyes fixed on my movements. When I stopped to compare cereal prices, he positioned himself at the end of the aisle, clearly watching. When I moved to the dairy section, he followed, standing near the milk coolers while staring in my direction. The surveillance was so obvious that other customers began noticing and looking uncomfortable. I decided to test whether this was coincidental by taking an unusual route through the store, going from electronics to automotive to garden center and back to groceries. He followed every step, sometimes walking parallel aisles to maintain visual contact, other times positioning himself at department intersections where he could monitor multiple areas. The behavior escalated over subsequent visits. On January 21st, the same guard, I learned his name was Kenneth Morrison from his badge, began approaching customers he was monitoring. He'd walk up under the pretense of offering help or asking if we'd found everything we needed, but his questions were invasive and his demeanor threatening. He asked me personal questions that had nothing to do with shopping, where I lived, whether I shopped alone regularly, what my work schedule was like. When I politely declined to answer, he became more aggressive, suggesting that uncooperative customers were usually hiding something. Other shoppers were experiencing similar harassment. Lisa Park, a mother of 2 young children, told me Morrison had followed her family through the store for 45 minutes, repeatedly approaching them and making her kids cry with his intimidating presence. He'd questioned why she was buying certain items and suggested her children were acting suspicious. Morrison's behavior became increasingly erratic throughout late January. He'd abandon his post at the entrance to follow individual customers throughout their entire shopping experience. He'd stand uncomfortably close while people made purchasing decisions, take notes on his phone about customer behavior, and make radio calls describing normal shopping activities as potential theft indicators. The situation reached a breaking point on February 3rd when I witnessed Morrison confront an elderly customer, Harold Stevens, near the pharmacy. Morrison accused Stevens of casing the store because he'd spent time reading product labels and comparing prices. Stevens, who was clearly confused and frightened, tried to explain he was shopping for his diabetic wife and needed to check ingredients carefully. Morrison's response was completely disproportionate. He demanded to search Stevens' cart, insisted on seeing identification, and called for backup over his radio while treating a routine grocery shopping trip like a criminal investigation. Other customers began gathering, clearly disturbed by Morrison's aggressive behavior toward an obviously harmless elderly man. I finally decided to report Morrison's behavior to store management. When I spoke with Assistant Manager David Wilson, I discovered I wasn't the first customer to complain. Wilson admitted they'd received numerous reports about Morrison's overzealous surveillance and inappropriate customer interactions over the past 3 weeks. Wilson explained that Morrison had been hired recently after losing his previous security job at a mall in Modesto. His references had been positive, but his behavior at Walmart had become increasingly problematic. Management was in the process of documenting incidents for potential disciplinary action. The real revelation came when I learned about Morrison's background from Detective Amanda Rodriguez of the Stockton Police Department, who arrived in her 2021 Chevrolet Tahoe after Wilson called to report the incident with Harold Stevens. Morrison had a history of workplace harassment complaints and had been terminated from 2 previous security positions for similar behavior. Detective Rodriguez explained that Morrison suffered from paranoid personality disorder and had convinced himself that shoplifting was an epidemic requiring extreme vigilance. He viewed every customer as a potential threat and interpreted normal shopping behavior, comparing prices, checking phone messages, carrying large purses as criminal indicators. During the investigation, we discovered Morrison had been maintaining detailed files on regular customers, including photographs taken without consent, notes about shopping patterns, and even license plate numbers from the parking lot. He'd created elaborate theories about organized theft rings based on completely innocent customer behavior. Morrison had been documenting my shopping trips for 3 weeks, noting what I purchased, how long I spent in different sections, and even personal details he'd overheard from phone conversations. He'd convinced himself I was part of a coupon fraud scheme because I used manufacturer coupons and shopped with a detailed list. The psychological impact on customers was significant. Many regular shoppers, particularly women and elderly customers, had stopped coming to the store because Morrison's surveillance made them feel unsafe. Parents reported their children were afraid of the mean security man who followed families around and stared at them. Store management terminated Morrison immediately after the investigation revealed the extent of his inappropriate surveillance. They implemented new security protocols requiring guards to remain at designated posts and limiting their authority to detain or question customers without specific evidence of theft. But the damage to customer trust was already done. Many people, including myself, had developed anxiety about shopping there. The place that should have felt safe with visible security presence had become a source of stress and fear because the person meant to protect customers had become a threat. Morrison was banned from all Walmart properties and charged with harassment and unlawful surveillance. The store offered counseling resources for customers who'd been affected by his behavior, but many people simply chose to shop elsewhere rather than deal with the psychological aftermath. The experience taught me that authority figures can abuse their positions in subtle but deeply disturbing ways. Morrison's uniform and official status had given him access to harass customers under the guise of security work, creating an environment where normal shopping activities became sources of anxiety and fear. What made this particularly troubling was realizing how many customers had been affected but remained silent, assuming Morrison's behavior was either normal security protocol or that their complaints wouldn't be taken seriously. His systematic harassment had been enabled by people's reluctance to challenge someone in a position of authority. The case highlighted how retail environments, which serve hundreds of people daily, can become hunting grounds for individuals who exploit their access to vulnerable populations. Customers focused on routine shopping tasks are particularly susceptible to harassment from people who appear to have legitimate authority. Have you ever felt uncomfortable with security personnel following you around the store or asking inappropriate personal questions? How would you handle a situation where someone in authority was making you feel unsafe in a place where you should feel protected? I'm Jessica Martinez, and I worked at the Fairview Walmart on Cedar Lane in Fresno, California, from 2019 until I quit in February 2024. What I'm about to tell you about my former manager, Gregory Walsh, is why I'll never work retail management again and why I still have trouble sleeping 3 months later. Walsh was hired as our overnight grocery manager in December 2023, brought in from corporate to improve performance metrics after our store ranked poorly in efficiency ratings. He arrived driving a silver 2020 Ford F-150 and immediately made it clear that major changes were coming. What none of us expected was the psychological warfare he'd wage against employees he deemed underperforming. I was an overnight stalker, working 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. restocking shelves and preparing for morning customers. It's physically demanding work lifting heavy boxes, working in cold storage areas, racing against time to get everything done before the store opened. The pay was $16.50 an hour, and most of us had been doing this job for years. But Walsh turned it into something far worse than any of us could have imagined. Within his first week, Walsh identified what he called his watch list, employees whose productivity scores fell below his arbitrary standards. I made the list after struggling with a particularly heavy dairy delivery on December 18th that took longer than expected due to a malfunctioning pallet jack. That's when my personal nightmare began, and it would only get worse over the following 2 months. Walsh installed himself at strategic locations throughout the store where he could observe his targeted employees. He positioned himself at the end of grocery aisles, pretending to check inventory while actually timing how long it took us to stock individual items. He carried a digital stopwatch, a notepad, and later upgraded to a tablet where he openly documented our every movement with timestamps. The surveillance was constant and unnerving. Walsh would appear wherever his watch list employees were working, standing close enough that we could feel his presence but far enough away to claim he was just doing his job. He'd time bathroom breaks down to the minute, document when we stopped to catch our breath, and even monitor our conversations with coworkers to ensure we weren't wasting time socializing. His methods became increasingly invasive throughout January. Walsh began following employees into break rooms, timing how long we spent eating lunch and whether we used our phones during breaks. He positioned himself outside the employee restroom, noting when we entered and exited, and once even questioned me about why I'd spent 4 minutes in the bathroom during my shift. He even started checking the parking lot to see which cars belonged to underperforming employees, documenting arrival and departure times. Walsh would stand by the employee entrance at shift change, making notes about who arrived exactly at clock-in time versus who came in a few minutes early. He treated every aspect of our work lives as potential evidence of inadequate performance. The psychological pressure was unbearable. Knowing Walsh was constantly watching made simple tasks feel impossible. I'd fumble with boxes, drop items, and make mistakes I'd never made in 5 years of retail work. My hands would shake when I saw him approaching, and I'd lose track of what I was doing. The stress of being monitored actually decreased my performance, which Walsh used as justification for increased surveillance. Walsh's behavior escalated significantly in January 2024. He began requiring his watchlist employees to provide written explanations for any task that took longer than his predetermined timeframes. These weren't reasonable discussions about efficiency, they were interrogations designed to make us feel incompetent and expendable. He'd corner us during shifts, demanding to know why we'd taken 2 minutes to stock a particular shelf instead of 90 seconds. He'd call individual employees into his office for what he called performance consultations, usually scheduled during our breaks so we couldn't avoid them. These sessions involved reviewing surveillance notes he'd compiled about our work habits, questioning our commitment to the job, and making veiled threats about our employment security. Several coworkers broke down crying during these meetings, and one woman, Sandra Chin, actually had a panic attack. The most disturbing aspect was Walsh's use of divide-and-conquer tactics. He'd pit employees against each other by sharing performance data publicly, creating an atmosphere where coworkers viewed each other as competition rather than teammates. He implemented a daily productivity board, where he posted everyone's numbers, highlighting underperformers in red ink. He'd praise high performers loudly while openly criticizing those on his watch list in front of other employees. Walsh's surveillance extended beyond work hours in ways that violated every boundary we thought existed. He began checking employee social media accounts, looking for posts that might indicate poor work attitude or criticism of store policies. During one of his performance consultations, he referenced a Facebook post I'd made about being tired after a long shift, suggesting it showed lack of dedication to the position. He'd also drive through the parking lot during off hours, checking whether employees' cars were at nearby businesses. Walsh once questioned Tommy Rodriguez about why his green 2015 Honda Civic had been spotted at a bar on a Tuesday night, implying that drinking might affect his work performance. The fact that Tommy had been there for his brother's birthday was irrelevant to Walsh. He saw it as evidence of poor judgment. The breaking point came on February 8 when Walsh confronted Maria Santos, a single mother who'd been struggling to balance work with caring for her sick 8-year-old daughter. Maria had been on his watch list for missing productivity targets while dealing with family emergencies, doctor appointments, school pickups when her daughter was too ill for daycare, and exhaustion from managing everything alone. During this confrontation, witnessed by several employees near the cereal aisle, Walsh accused Maria of using personal problems as excuses for poor performance. He suggested that her family responsibilities made her unsuitable for overnight work and questioned whether she was truly committed to this position. When Maria began crying, Walsh showed no empathy, instead lecturing her about maintaining professionalism in the workplace. Walsh then demanded that Maria work additional unpaid hours to make up for lost productivity, and suggested her employment was in jeopardy unless she could prove her commitment. He wanted her to come in early and stay late without compensation, essentially requiring her to abandon her child to keep her job. Several of us were horrified by his complete lack of humanity. That's when I realized Walsh's behavior had crossed from aggressive management into workplace harassment and potentially illegal discrimination. Several of us decided to document his actions and report him to store management and corporate HR. We compiled detailed records of his surveillance activities, inappropriate comments, discriminatory behavior toward employees with family obligations, and his pattern of targeting specific individuals. Store manager Patricia Williams initially seemed supportive when we reported Walsh's behavior on February 12. She scheduled individual meetings with affected employees and promised a thorough investigation. However, we soon discovered that Walsh had been providing her with detailed reports about employee performance that painted us in the worst possible light. He'd been systematically undermining our reputations with management for weeks. The investigation revealed Walsh's true motivation, which was far more calculated than simple poor management skills. He'd been hired with a specific mandate to reduce labor costs by forcing out higher-paid employees and replacing them with new hires at lower wages. His surveillance and harassment were deliberate strategies to create documentation justifying terminations for cause, which would prevent unemployment benefits and avoid severance costs. Walsh had been targeting employees with seniority, those who'd earned raises over years of service, and anyone who might qualify for benefits or advancement opportunities. His watch list wasn't based on actual performance issues, it was a calculated effort to eliminate employees who represented higher labor costs to the company. Several targeted employees had been with the company for over 3 years and were earning $18 to $20 per hour compared to new hires at $15. Corporate HR eventually intervened after multiple complaints reached the district level, but only after significant damage had been done. They discovered Walsh had similar issues at his previous location in Modesto, where he'd been transferred after several workers filed formal complaints about his surveillance and intimidation tactics. He'd been moved to our store rather than terminated, essentially making us his new victims. During the investigation, we learned Walsh had been maintaining detailed files on targeted employees that went far beyond normal performance documentation. He'd been photographing employee break areas to monitor who socialized together, tracking which employees carpooled or had relationships outside work, and even noting personal items in employee lockers to build profiles of our personal lives. Walsh had also been manipulating work schedules to set up targeted employees for failure. He'd assign impossible tasks with unrealistic timeframes, then document the inevitable delays as performance issues. He'd schedule his watch list employees in sections where they had less experience, then criticize them for taking longer to complete unfamiliar tasks. Every aspect of his management was designed to create evidence supporting termination. The investigation revealed that Walsh had been recording conversations with employees during his performance consultations, without consent, using his company tablet to capture audio of disciplinary meetings. He'd also been accessing employee personal information from HR files, including emergency contacts, previous employment history, and attendance records going back years. Most disturbing was discovering Walsh's detailed plans for eliminating specific employees. He'd created timelines for building disciplinary cases, estimated how long it would take to document sufficient cause for termination, and even calculated the financial savings from replacing experienced workers with new hires. We weren't people to him, we were line items in a cost reduction strategy. The psychological impact on our overnight crew was devastating and long-lasting. Several long-term employees quit rather than endure Walsh's harassment, losing years of accumulated benefits and seniority. Others developed anxiety disorders and began experiencing panic attacks at work. Susan Wright, a 10-year employee, started having nightmares about being watched and had to seek therapy through her insurance. The overnight shift, which had been a close-knit team that supported each other through difficult work, became fractured and distrustful. Walsh's tactics had poisoned relationships between coworkers who'd previously been friends. People stopped talking to each other during breaks, afraid their conversations might be monitored and used against them. The collaborative atmosphere that made night shifts bearable was completely destroyed. Even after Walsh was terminated in March 2024, the toxic atmosphere he'd created persisted. New employees heard stories about his behavior and became paranoid about surveillance. Productivity actually decreased because people were afraid to take necessary breaks or ask for help with difficult tasks. The store struggled to maintain adequate staffing as word spread about the hostile work environment. Walsh was ultimately terminated after the investigation confirmed multiple policy violations, potential legal liability, and evidence of discriminatory practices. However, by then, much of the overnight crew had already left, and the remaining employees were traumatized. The store had to hire and train an entirely new overnight team, costing far more than any savings from Walsh's harassment campaign. The experience taught me how easily workplace authority can be weaponized against vulnerable employees who lack resources to fight back. Walsh used his position to systematically terrorize workers who were already struggling with demanding jobs, low wages, and limited job security. His surveillance created an atmosphere of fear that made everyone less productive and destroyed the team morale that's essential for overnight retail work. What made Walsh's behavior particularly insidious was how he framed harassment as performance management. By claiming concern for productivity and efficiency, he was able to justify invasive surveillance and psychological intimidation that would have been recognized as abuse in any other context. His corporate-approved language about metrics and accountability masked systematic workplace bullying. The case highlighted how retail workers, who often lack strong union protection or job security, can become targets for managers who view them as expendable resources rather than human beings deserving of dignity and respect. Walsh's systematic harassment was enabled by corporate structures that prioritize cost reduction over employee well-being, creating environments where abuse can flourish unchecked. The legal aftermath revealed that Walsh's behavior had exposed the company to significant liability for hostile work environment claims, discrimination lawsuits, and potential violations of labor laws regarding surveillance and working conditions. Several employees consulted attorneys about civil claims, and the store implemented mandatory management training to prevent similar incidents. For me personally, the experience fundamentally changed how I view retail work and workplace authority. I left Walmart and found employment at a smaller company where management treats employees as value team members rather than potential threats. But I still struggle with anxiety about workplace surveillance and have difficulty trusting supervisors completely. The trauma of being constantly watched and criticized affected my self-confidence and work performance even after leaving that environment. I found myself overanalyzing every task, worried about invisible observers judging my efficiency. It took months of therapy to understand that Walsh's treatment wasn't a reflection of my abilities but rather evidence of his own dysfunction and the company's failure to protect employees. Have you ever worked for a manager who made you feel constantly watched and criticized, treating you more like a suspect than an employee? How would you handle a situation where a supervisor was using their authority to systematically harass employees under the guise of performance improvement? And what would you do if reporting the behavior didn't immediately result in changes? Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.